I've been using an iPad fairly regularly as like a digital notebook since the first one came out while I was in school. And all of the refinements they've been making over the past 8 years really feel like they've been leading up to the M4, which just feels like peak iPad hardware. It's 5.3mm thick, weighs less than a pound, has a new tandem OLED display, and all of that put together just makes this feel like a pane of glass you interact with that weighs almost nothing. And most of all, I think I was really excited about how much lighter this was, especially since my like more portable setup is just the iPad and an X100V in this sling when I don't want to carry around a full backpack. But the convenience of a setup that weighs almost nothing kind of goes away when you add the Magic Keyboard, which I generally have attached to my iPad since what I'm doing on it is generally more typing focused, like writing scripts, responding to emails, and just other like general productivity things that I need to type text for. But at least the new Magic Keyboard is redesigned and a lot better than the old one. So it has an aluminum top, a full function row, and a bigger trackpad that uses the same haptic feedback as the MacBook, which is exactly what it feels like you're using when you're using this Magic Keyboard. Also new with the hardware, Apple moved the front-facing camera to the landscape edge, so it's not off to the side anymore when you're FaceTiming. It's nice to have, but I don't usually like taking calls from my iPad just because I prefer having a monitor with a couple of different screens pulled up either for reference or just taking notes. I will say though, this new camera placement combined with the new Magic Keyboard is starting to give the iPad like a real MacBook vibe. But moving on to the display, I always thought the mini LED looked really good, and I was kind of disappointed they didn't bring it to the 11-inch Pro. It was only on the 12.9-inch. So I was really excited to see that the M4 had the tandem OLED tech in both the 11-inch and the 13-inch models, since like I've mentioned, portability is a big thing for the iPad for me, so I prefer having that smaller device. And the tandem OLED is just two OLED panels stacked on top of each other to effectively double the brightness, so it's the same as the mini LED displays. And for like normal day-to-day use, this will let each individual panel run at a lower brightness with a higher efficiency. So in the long term, this reduces the chance of burn-in like you have on other OLEDs and also increases the lifespan of these displays. It really is all of the benefits of OLED like contrast ratio and absolute blacks, without any of the downsides that come with it. And honestly, it's one of the best displays I've ever used, and it just makes me want to use the iPad more because everything looks so good on it. Whether it be watching a movie on a plane, editing video, or just writing a script in notes. I've actually been using it a lot more for sidecar when I'm away from my desk, since it's like having a portable Pro Display XDR with me at all times. Originally, I had thought that 2 OLED panels would really impact the battery life, but honestly, it's on par with the last iPad. I charge it maybe every other day once it gets like 10 to 20% depending on how much I'm using it. And I've taken this on long flights and even short trips as my main device and never had any issues with the battery. I'll get to like how I actually use the iPad and it fits into my workflow, but powering all of this is the new M4 chip, which actually has a display engine specifically built for the tandem OLED. And since it's built in at like the chip level, I'm assuming this means that other devices, the M4 chip will eventually get tandem OLED displays. Also on paper, it's faster than the M2, which was already a lot of power for the iPad, but Apple really emphasized how much better this is gonna be for AI. Since the neural engine can do 38 trillion ops per second, while the CPU is 50% faster and the GPU is 4 times as fast. And for like regular day-to-day use, you don't feel much of a difference here. Everything's just kind of faster, kind of snappier. But when you start to do those heavier and more complex tasks like Photoshop or Final Cut Pro, you really start to see where that power is going. And speaking of, I was really excited for this updated Final Cut Pro for iPad. You can finally edit off internal storage, and you can have up to 4 live streams of multi-cam footage from the new Final Cut camera app. And I already use the iPhone as a B-cam, and that app has been great to just get a little bit more control over the footage that comes out of it. Also, I edit off an SSD anyways, so kind of a key part of fitting the iPad into my workflow was getting the capability to just edit off of the same drive and then having that consistency between the iPad and my Mac. I actually edited the first pass of this video on the iPad before I moved it to my MacBook for color grading, some plugins, and the final export. And it was a really nice experience. Like, I do want to try it out a few more times to see what this whole process is like and if I can bring more parts to the iPad or if I need to move to the MacBook sooner. But I enjoyed just being able to touch the screen to select what I wanted or to drag and drop a clip. Like, it felt a lot more intuitive than I was expecting it to, since I'm so used to using a keyboard and a mouse. And moving on to the rest of the software, I really like working on the iPad just because like the nature of iPadOS helps me stay in a task, if that makes sense. Like, the lack of good multitasking helps me focus on one thing and just get it done. But on the flip side, it starts to feel a little limited when there isn't an app for something, or if there's a more complex task that spans across a few different apps. At which point it just gets kind of frustrating having to switch back and forth constantly, so I end up just going back to my laptop. Like split view works fine when I just need one app up as reference for something else that I'm doing, but for like window management, Stage Manager just feels really unwieldy, if that makes sense. Like the apps end up being smaller and you still have to switch around between them. At that point, I might as well be swiping between different apps that I have open, so I'm using at least as much of the screen as possible. I'm hoping they keep updating iPadOS to be a lot more capable like they did with Final Cut Pro, so I can start carrying this around more often as my main device, especially when I'm like traveling for work and I already have another computer with me. But overall, this is a really impressive piece of hardware, and it just feels a little held back by the software. It's already starting to fit into certain parts of my workflow in place of my MacBook, so I'm excited to see where it could go, especially if they take that like make pro apps better approach to the rest of iPadOS, and also Apple Intelligence. Like I hope it's as cool as it seems like. But thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos about tech, cameras, and making. Here's a video about the iPhone 15 Pro, and here's a video that YouTube thinks you're gonna like the best.